Hi folks, we're going to get started on lesson 13 today.
So here's the first thing. This is where you are actually hired by the company to do a job to consult, or that is, you already have the position, you're working at a company, and part of your job is just presenting a solution, right? So you don't necessarily need to be a consultant at McKinsey to need to know how to present a case. This is going to work well for you. This is good knowledge to have no matter what you're doing within the company, whether it's a new marketing plan, or you're trying to propose a new product that you think the company should do. And all these things, you want to really take the position that you are have a personal stake in the outcome. So you want to take the position that if they do take your plan, this is going to benefit you somehow. I mean, I think that always, if you feel ownership in what you're talking about, you're going to come across as a lot stronger. So in order to do that, you don't want to sound like you have no idea what you're talking about. Right, so how do you do that? Well, first you want to start by skimming the information. So don't feel bad in the first time that you're not going to pay as much attention to details. This is just the first time you're going through it. I find this is useful because you're going to know exactly what material is part of the packet that you need to review, right? So in the business, you're going to know exactly what issues you're going to have to learn about, right? And then you're going to go back later on and actually go through and spend a little more time with the details. Right? So you're read thoroughly, going to organize the facts. Might be really important at this phase just to make sure your notes are really organized, right? Make sure you're dividing things up in packs. You don't forget anything. Then you want to review the exhibits. I always feel that you can cram more information. You can have a more powerful visual than you can by having, say, 5 or 6 slides. You can pack all that stuff onto one slide with a really strong visual. That's part of what I've been doing in this semester when I've been creating new lessons, has been to try to create these exhibits and try to do things so you have all the material on one page. A little easier to follow along that way. You want to determine what the strategic issues for the problem are, right? So what is the company's dilemma? Right? Why did they bring you to do it? Why didn't they just do this this case study themselves? There's some value to having you complete this and try to decide what those strategic issues are. It might not hurt just to even look at evidence that has nothing to do with the case. Right? That's just the company. Why? What's the company's mission? What's the company's vision? We talked about that stuff a little earlier in the semester. If you could figure out what that stuff is, right? Your plan that you propose is going to be that much more powerful. All right, then we're going to get to what we were talking about in the last lesson, running the numbers, right? So lesson 11 covers that, running numbers. All right, this is going to be really important to go through, see what the problems are. What is your, where does the company stand in return on assets? Where does it stand in stock price? What are really the big things? Then you're going to apply, once you get the results, right, and again, use lesson 11 for that. You then take the key management theories. We're going to talk a little bit about SWOT analysis today. We'll talk about the resource-based view as far as a company's competencies, as far as a sustainable competitive advantage as well. And we're going to go on from there. So you want to make sure that you think about those key management theories, and we'll talk about that as we're going through. Now, it's important that you don't ignore other possible plans, right? So first off, you want to think about what the other options would be, and that's actually going to be formally part of the case analysis. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But you want to make sure you do not just overlook things because they don't fit into a very narrow bucket that you've defined. All right, you want to make sure you support your diagnosis and your recommendation with evidence, right? It should not be just opinion, right? It should not just be a commentary that you're presenting. There should be logic to your solution. And then perhaps most important to the company itself is they want to know what you need them to do, an action plan. Are they going to decide to either follow your suggestion or not? And a lot of times it comes down to how strong is that action plan. So like I said, I've been assigning case studies for many years. I have seen good case studies. I have seen poor case studies. I have seen things that fall in the middle. And I will tell you, one of the most common things that I see in a poor presentation is the group that says, I think, or we think, right? It shouldn't be that. It should be the analysis shows this, right? Following the presentation of the numbers, the biggest problem area is XYZ, right? Make sure it all follows from it. In determining the company's strengths and more importantly, weaknesses, the best solution is XYZ. There should not be an I think or a we. They're not paying you to think, right? They're paying you to come to a conclusion that follows from the numbers that you're looking at. So very, very important to do it. Now you want to make sure you prioritize your recommendation as well. There's likely going to be multiple parts to your recommendation. You want to tell them what's the most important stuff to focus on. But if you're giving a presentation, a lot of times the people in the room have not analyzed the issue as well as you have. So they're relying a lot on what information you're giving them. Now this one's important, playing devil's advocate. When you're putting your analysis together, what you and your team want to do is to take one person or take a friend that has no idea what the case is, and have them try to point out criticisms when you're going through. Have them play devil's advocate. Have them focus on what the problems and the holes would be of the plan that you're presenting. Now, you might not be able to do very much about those holes, but at least if you know what they are ahead of time, you can prepare yourself for when the executives are going to ask you the same kinds of questions, right? They're going to point at the same kinds of holes. You want to make sure you have a solution. One thing that I actually have done when I've given presentations before is I've anticipated the biggest questions. I will create a slide and I'll put it in, it's one that I won't show unless a question about that comes up, and then I show that slide, right? It's better because it's sort of, if you think about detail-oriented things, when you're presenting, you don't necessarily want to present the minute details. You want to present enough for them to understand, but this is a higher level type of a presentation. So if you have a hole, and that hole governs something that's very specific, create a slide, right? And put that in there, but don't present it unless the question comes up. Okay. Be aware of any downside or consequences of your recommendation. This is really big one. I'll tell you guys that as a professor at UNT, we have obviously a lot of businesses that will come out to us asking for advice. Well, one of my colleagues, who is a lecturer in the College of Business, was trying to get me to consult a business. It was a business in the area that come to him, and he was trying to get me involved with it. Well, they wanted my expertise on creating essentially a strategic plan about going about something that was really important in the organization. Now, the problem is this: if I did it, and it would be for free that I was going to do it, if I did it and I told them this is what you need to do, if there was a problem later on, there's a possibility that they could come after me, right? I'm doing something that's free, but they might say, hey, look, you are a representative of University of North Texas. You told us to do this. We did this, and it did not work out. So you owe us money. That's exactly the kind of thing that you guys want to avoid in your situation. You want to be very careful that if you present something, you tell a company to do something, you make it very clear that you are offering, if you're offering something that's risky, then make sure you have appropriate safeguards so the company won't go after you and say, well, this is your suggestion and it did not work out. We are going to sue you for that. So be very careful. You got to think about litigation, especially in this world, right? But still, they're paying you to come up with a solution. It's going to be very hard to just draw the facts and say, well, yeah, I can confirm you had a problem here, and you need to think about the best course of action, right? They're hiring you to do that, right? That's your job. So you've got to still give a solution. Just be very careful when your recommendations. If it seems something that's risky, point out what that risk is. That might be enough to prepare, to protect yourself. Use a right medium for the message. You don't want to only show numbers if you're in a room of people that have never had a finance background or an accounting background. If you are presenting to a room full of accountants about a possible merger and acquisition, you want to emphasize the numbers, right? So know who your audience is. If it's a marketing presentation, marketing types are a certain way, right? They like interaction. They like fun, creative aspects. You want to play up that angle. So know the audience. Right, I can tell you that I can't really imagine too many audiences outside the possibility of an all accounting audience where just showing slides that are dry and only have numbers and you're not really elaborating on them. I can't imagine that being an effective plan for too many audiences. And that goes along with this one, connecting to your audience. Right, they want to hear stories. They want you to relate it to them. If the company is specializes in making movies, you don't probably want to give examples from the manufacturing industry, right? That's going to go over their head. Cater it to what the audience is. When I started teaching strategy many years ago, I would use textbooks where all the examples were manufacturing, right? How many undergraduate students, right, at age 19 or 20 have extensive knowledge of the manufacturing industry? Not many, right? So I actually ended up throwing out the examples. I'd come up with ones from the entertainment industry. I actually taught a course several years ago where every example I used was from the entertainment industry. So I geared it towards like Hollywood and also technology companies, but mostly towards the entertainment sector. And it was a hit. It worked. At least I don't really know that. I don't have the exact evaluations in front of me, but I can only presume, given that there was no nasty emails, that it was a hit. Let's move on. Components of a case analysis. We're going to go through each one of these individually. We're going to start by talking about what you want to think and including in the problem and solution. We're going to go on through all the way to implementing the idea and the kinds of things you'd want to include for that. So we'll start with problem and solution. This is the most basic part to it. Now, I want to point something out that is important. I'm not saying the executive summary first. Right? I'm going to start with the problem and the solution. And why is that? Well, it's possible that you have audience members that are so clueless about what is going on that you give them an executive summary and they still don't know what the problem is. Right? So this is where you're starting out. What is the main issue? Right? What are you being hired to do or asked to do for the company you work for? Right? The recommendation should be presented. Should be easy to follow logic, keeping in mind you are about to do an executive summary, so you don't want to get into many details. But by doing this, it's going to be useful to your audience, but also it's going to be useful to you because you're going to establish early on what the issue is and what the problem is. That's what I mean by X and Y. What's the connection between the two? Everything that you're doing should be mindful of what X is, what the problem is, and what Y is, what the solution is. So once you do that, you then move on to the executive summary. Now, even though you present this second, this slide, this part of your presentation should be the last thing that you do, right? And you guys have been reading articles that are higher level. You've probably read some things in the Harvard Business Review for some of the other classes and whatnot. You know what an abstract is. An abstract is very academic. So what you're going to want to do, and an abstract too is also neutral, doesn't say, it doesn't have any bias in it. The executive summary is going to have the proposed solution, which could, you got to be careful about it. You don't want it to sound like it's an opinion. It should be something that's logic. But there's definitely going to be a clear push to one decision the company that needs to make. So just some technical stuff. It should be 5 to 10% of the main report length. If you're doing a paper or some type of a deliverable, you want to make it 5-10%. I've seen executive summaries that are almost half of the report itself. I've seen that. Don't make your report that long. Your executive summary that long. When you're presenting it, this should be easy to digest, right? So it shouldn't have what I call technobabble. That's a word from Star Trek when they would be talking about things that they were making up sci-fi terms, knowing the audience had no idea what those terms were. Like Back to the Future, what is a flux capacitor, right? That's technobabble, right? So it should be short and it should be concise. You should not be putting material in the executive summary that does not appear elsewhere. You can use different words, that's fine, but if you mention something, you mention some analysis you did, and you don't talk about it in the main report, there's a big problem. Right, so this is going to take your problem and solution component one step forward by really getting into, you're talking about X and Y in the problem solution, you're really trying to justify why, that is, justify your solution. Here's something to remember. A bad summary is going to be enough for an executive to throw your report out or stop listening to your presentation. The executive summary needs to make sense. It needs to be something that's digestible. Now, I've seen cases, there's some executives that no matter what you do, they're just not going to pay attention to anything besides the executive summary. They just don't have enough time to read a report. And so that's almost all they're going to look at in some cases. That's very dangerous, right? You need to assume that the executives are going to be listening to everything else you're saying or reading everything else that you're writing. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about brief history as far as this part of the presentation. What we're talking about here is what the company has been doing. Right? Now make sure that everything you're talking about is relevant to the problem and the solution. Right? The board of directors and the top management team know when their company started. They know where it was headquartered. They know who the founder was, right? Don't mention that kind of stuff. You're really, when I say history, you're not really giving the history of the company. You're giving the history of the problem, right? And now this is something that's true not just for this slide, but for everything else. The more graphics, the more charts you use, the stronger your presentation is going to be, right? It's very easy for them to doze off during a presentation, or it's very easy for them to just stop reading a report. Charts are very helpful in getting their attention on what you're trying to talk about. So make sure you do get charts. I mentioned that earlier, how valuable that stuff actually is. So after you give the history of the problem, you then use a lot of the knowledge that you have hopefully learned from this class. You do an industry analysis. Now, one of the most common errors I see, and that is in every class I've taught, including this one, is that opportunities and threats should be the same for every company that's in the industry. Right? So when you're doing an industry analysis, whether you're doing it for McDonald's, Burger King, or Wendy's, it should be exactly the same. Right? It should be exactly, they have the exact same opportunities. Right, expanding into breakfast. Right, that's one that McDonald's did. Right, it's an opportunity for, all-day breakfast. It's an opportunity for every fast food chain to do. Right, because the hours that people are working is so different. You know, it's so diverse that there are some people that want to have breakfast before they start their midnight shift. Right, their day is set up that way, so it's an opportunity. Right, people working overnight, more and more people working overnight. It's an opportunity for the market. Right, also threats. Right, you want to also make sure you mention threats. If there is a problem with the potato growers in the world, that you better believe is going to have an effect on every fast food restaurant. It's not a McDonald's issue. It's not a Wendy's issue. It's a fast food issue. So everything you mentioned in opportunities and threats should be issues for every single company. Okay, you also want to emphasize any trends that you're starting to see in the marketplace. Fast food had the health trend, and I should probably use quotations around health, but a lot of them were facing pressure from stakeholders to A, list calories, B, move away from requiring fries in kids' meals. Those were big issues. Then coffee became a really big trend where chains were emphasizing better quality coffee. One of the things that it would do would be getting customers in during days when they normally wouldn't have customers. If I mentioned I worked in the fast food industry, and I can tell you that the biggest times when people would come in are about noon and 5. You don't have very many people coming between then. The push to sell coffee brings people in at other times. You can make better use of your labor that way. The focus for industry analysis is on the competition. You shouldn't really mention anything that is very specific to the company itself, right? The focus is on what is the competition doing. Now, you do get into the company itself when you do company analysis. So industry analysis, you're talking about opportunities and threats. Company analysis, you're talking about strengths and weaknesses. One of the most important things to mention when you're giving an analysis are the financials, right? You want to make sure you relate the key financial statistics to the problem that is at hand. You want to go over where the biggest challenges are for the company. Now, keep this in mind, right? When you give a proposed solution, that company's probably going to have to spend some money on execution of whatever that plan is. So you've got to think about that. If the company is in dire straits, the company is not going to be able to support a sweeping plan that would involve many millions upon millions of dollars. Right? So you've got to really be aware of what you're doing when it comes to the company analysis. Include financials. You probably are going to need to do a little bit of work outside of just seeing the website of the company or just looking at the annual report. You might have to do some investigation of your own. You might need to talk to some employees. You really got to become a reporter and give a idea of a company picture that the executives probably don't even know themselves. Right? You look at, if you guys ever watch Undercover Boss, right, and you'll see that the executives are so clueless about what's going on at lower levels of the organization. Right? So a lot of times your audience honestly has no idea. They haven't been out to the front line. So you're coming in there, you're trying to diagnose the problem. Talk about these kinds of issues. The odds are they don't know what's going on at the front level of the organization. So you have talked about the problem, right? You've talked about the industry. You've talked about the company itself, and you talked, focus, of course, on weaknesses. If you're only focused on strengths, why are you presenting a case analysis, right? There probably isn't much of an issue. Of course, there's a problem, which is why it's noteworthy and why they brought you on. All right, the next step is going to be to present 2 solutions that you're going to end up not recommending. All right, so what might be helpful in telling your audience or making so your audience understands why it's not the recommended solution is to remind them what the main problem actually is. All right, so remind them what the main problem is. Point out the reasons why all of your other 2 proposed ideas are not the ideal solution that you're going to recommend. Right? So you want to talk about some pros of the plan, talk about some cons. Right? The problem is some of the pros for the alternative plans might be better than some of the pros for your ultimate recommended proposal. So just keep that in mind. If that's the case, you really need to make your recommended solution sound like the cons are so overwhelming in the alternative ideas that there's just no way to avoid it, and that's why your plan is the best option for the company. So describe the pros and cons. What you want to talk about is what the alternative solution does not solve. So again, you reminded them what the main problem is. Main problem is X, Y, Z. The alternative solution solves X, but makes Y more of a problem, and Z is not considered at all. That would be something that'd be a format of what you want to use there. So you give 2 solutions, and then the third one is the ultimate solution you're recommending. That's the one that you want them to actually go out and implement. One of the things that really helps in putting this part together is, again, coming up with some kind of a graphic, but this graphic would show all 3 solutions together, right? One of the things you could do is maybe create separate columns, create a checklist. If solution 1 solves the first issue in the first column, put a check there. If solution 2 does not, don't put a check there, right? And the idea is that the third solution, the one that you're suggesting to go with, you're checking off every single box, right, for everything that you want to accomplish. Okay, so you've given them the options, and you need them to pick one. Right? You're hoping that they will pick the recommended solution. Now you need to talk about implementation. All right, so there's two things on here, but they're really important, so I want to talk a little bit more about them. One is going to be you want to underscore the risks and solutions to those risks. So like I said before, we are in a world where there's more and more litigation, right? You take more and more risk in anything you do in business, and especially if you're giving something that could affect a major business decision. You bet that there could be dire consequences if the plan backfires. So you want to make sure you are careful to outline the risks, right? One of the other things too, don't assume that the company is going to do necessarily everything you just assume that they're going to do as far as regulatory issues go. You might get yourself in trouble if you propose a bold plan, but you don't propose the company doing its due diligence in executing that plan. I could see it being a possibility that if the company gets in hot water later on, the company would try to throw you under the bus. So be very careful about that. Now, the important thing to executives, they want to see some type of a timeline. They want to see what exactly they need to do, where they need to move their resources, and they want to see a timeline, right? What should they accomplish by first quarter of the next year? What should they have accomplished by second quarter of the next year, right? If you look at the I-35 expansion in North Texas, right, there was a there's a timeline that covers maybe 4 or 5 years. I was actually looking at it. I was stuck in traffic and got home, was curious, how far along are we? And you can look up the plans on the website. And I was able to find out where exactly they were in the construction. All right, so give them a timeline. What needs to be done by what point? After you do that, after you talk about the implementation issues, right? And it's going to definitely be more. I'm just presenting some of the key things that you want to talk about, but you want to really make sure you give a very thorough job in talking about implementation beyond what I was just talking about. You have to cater it to the company. You want to then recap, right? Recap what you've been talking about, recap what they've been there. You want to quickly summarize the proposed solution. Don't use the exact same words. That's very important, right? They don't want to feel like you are talking down to them and like they're dumb, right? So you want to possibly use different words, but it being the same basic story. You want to highlight the positive aspect of what you're talking about. So you talked about pros, you talked about cons of the plan. Highlight the cons, right? And if you can present that part in a different way, that's going to be even more effective, right? If you can present, let's say that you talk to possible customers and you got some of their feedback on the proposed solution, that might be a great thing to include. Right? So the more creative that you can get, especially at this point, the better off your presentation is going to be. You want to then focus on the very first thing that executives need to do as soon as your presentation is over, right? So what's the very first decision that they need to do? Where do they have to move money? Do they have to hire somebody? Do they need to do further research? What's the first thing they need to do? And then after you get done with that, you want to end the presentation with some sort of thank you slide. Of course, open it up to questions in the room where they will be asking you things, and hopefully you can anticipate the type of questions they're going to ask you. All right, folks, if you do that, you will have an effective case analysis and possibly a really fantastic presentation that will get your name out there and hopefully further your careers in some way or get you a very large paycheck. All right, thank you all very much.